If you've been to a basketball game or a football game, most likely you have heard the United States National Anthem sung. But do you know what it means? Do you know its history? Well, hopefully in the next 5 minutes or so, you will learn the history of the National Anthem. My name is Dr. Rick Gardiner from Columbus State University, and this is a Muscogee County School District podcast, the National Anthem. Do you remember the history of the American Revolution? That was the war in which the United States won its independence from Britain. Not 30 years later, there was another war in which the British felt like they wanted a rematch. That war is called the War of 1812. For the first 2 years of the War of 1812, Britain was in a difficult spot. They were fighting against Napoleon in Europe, and they couldn't give all of their attention and their resources and their dedication to fighting the United States. But in 1814, Napoleon was vanquished. He was exiled to the island of Elba, and the British now turned all of their attention on the United States. Now, here was the British plan. First, they were going to attack and burn the United States Capitol. Now, of course, that's Washington, D.C. And then from there, they were going to go up to the next closest big city called Baltimore in Maryland. They would burn that. And if they did that, they might proceed to Philadelphia and New York and Boston. And surely at some point, the United States would surrender and come back into the British Empire. The first part of their plan was a success. They marched from the Chesapeake Bay through Bladensburg, Maryland, and then set the United States Capitol of Washington, D.C. on fire. Indeed, even the Capitol building, even the White House was torched by the British on August 24, 1814. Their next target was Baltimore, Maryland. So they sailed their navy all the way up the Chesapeake Bay towards Baltimore. It was here that the fate of the United States would hang in the balance in September of 1814. Now, the harbor of Baltimore was protected by Fort Mchenry. And on the night of September 13, 1814, the British decided they were going to attack the fort and take the city. One of the people who watched this battle from a distance was Francis Scott Key. And the way he could tell who won the battle was by looking at the flag over top of Fort Mchenry. As long as the United States flag was flying, it was a clear indication to him that the United States was still in control of the fort. But as soon as he saw the Union Jack, the British flag, he would know that the United States has lost the city of Baltimore, perhaps Philadelphia, New York, Boston, and probably the entire war. When the sun went down on September 13th, Francis Scott Key and his friends said goodnight to the flag that they saw in the distance. They waved at it, they saluted it, and then they tried to get some sleep. But the battle raged on through the night. And although the rockets and the bombs were really scary, the flash of the explosions gave them the opportunity to quickly see which flag was flying over top of Fort McHenry. Well, eventually they went to bed. But as soon as the sun rose in the morning, Francis Scott Key had a very important question for his friends. Whose flag is flying over Fort McHenry this morning? Or in other words, hey guys, do we still have a country? Does the United States still exist this morning? Shortly thereafter, Francis Scott Key sat down and wrote a poem. And the first part of the poem is simply the question that he asked his friends on that fateful morning in Baltimore. The poem begins with this line. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming? In other words, buddies, can you see that flag that we saluted before we went to bed last night, now that the sun has come up? In the next line of the poem, Key describes the flag that they saluted, that they hailed the night before. He talks about its broad stripes and its bright stars, and he talks about seeing them over top of the walls of Fort Mchenry, and the walls were referred to as ramparts. And he describes the way in which the broad stripes and the bright stars were waving in the wind. He said they were gallantly streaming. So the second line of his poem goes, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight over the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming. Next, Key gives thanks for the bombs bursting, the occasional flash of the rockets, because those rockets assured him and his friends throughout the whole night that the American flag was still flying. So the next line of the poem says, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. And then Key finishes his poem by asking the question again, oh say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave? Does the United States, this country in which liberty and freedom is championed, still exist? Did we win the fight? Do we still have a homeland? In the next part of the poem, Key answers his own question. Yes, by the dawn's early light, they could still see the United States flag, the star-spangled banner, flying over Fort Mchenry. And what did that mean? That meant that the U.S. won the Battle of Fort McHenry and consequently the War of 1812. And that meant that the United States would continue to exist for many, many years to come. So when you sing that song at a football game or a basketball game, reflect on this history, but also reflect on the fact that it's an open-ended question. It's something that every generation needs to ask. Do we have the dedication? Do we have the perseverance? Do we have the blessings of above to maintain our existence on this planet as the land of the free and the home of the brave? Let us never forget the history, the wonderful drama behind the National Anthem. My name is Dr. Richard Gardiner from Columbus State University, and this has been another Muscogee County School District podcast, the National Anthem.